Now I'll go to share screen. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. It's good to see you. Thank you for tuning in. So today we're going to start all brand new again. We're going to start all the way at the beginning. We're going to rewind our Divrei Torah. We have rewound them already because of Simchas Torah. And we're going to go back to Bereishis, where it all begins. Bereishis is a very challenging parsha on so many different levels. I want to share with you two ideas from Parshas Bereishis today that I hope will be able to enrich your understanding of the parsha and add something perhaps that you may not have known or seen before or thought of before. So let's begin. So we're going to start in Perek Gimel. The third chapter in Bereishis is the incident in the Garden of Eden in Gan Eden between Adam and Chava and the Nachash, that serpent from the 6 days of creation, that Nachash, that unique creature that was responsible for getting Chava to eat from the Eitz Hadas, and which she eventually feeds to Adam as well. So let's see how the pasuk talks about this. It says, "V'hanachash haya arumi kol chayas hasadeh." The serpent was cunning more than any of the other beasts of the field, Asher asa Hashem Elokim, that God had created. Vayomer elo isha. So this Nachash, the original Nachash, had some ability to speak. So this Nachash communicates to Chava, to the woman, and says to her as follows: Af ki amar Elokim lo sochlu mikol eitz hagan. Is it true? I heard the word around the street, what I'm hearing around the water cooler, all the blogs are reporting, is that Hashem told you you're not allowed to eat from any of the fruit in the garden. Is that true? Beis. So she says back to him, Vatomer Ishal Nachash. So the woman, Chava, she says back to the Nachash, to the serpent, that's not true. Where'd you hear that? That's fake news. She says to him, no, we are allowed to eat fruit. There's all sorts of delicious fruit in this garden. We can eat all the fruit we want. However, it's just one tree, the fruit of one tree in this garden. God told us that we're not supposed to eat. And she adds, velo sigubo. Not only are we not supposed to eat it, we're also not supposed to touch it. Hentamusun, or else we might die. Dalet, 4. So the serpent says to the woman, Lomos tamusun. That's not true. Come on. Where are you getting this from? God's making up these stories. You're going to eat this fruit and you're going to touch it and you're going to die. Come on. That's not true. Hey, 5. The only reason why God put this threat out there that you're going to die is because God really knows, if you would eat from it on the day that you eat from that fruit, then your eyes will become opened, and you will become like gods yourselves, and you will know the difference between good and evil. So it's not that you're going to die, rather, God doesn't want you to enjoy that fruit, because then if you eat from that fruit, you'll end up being a threat to him, because it'll make you godlike yourself. Vav, 6. And then the woman sees that the tree was good for food. It was very appealing to her. And it was a delight to the eyes. And the tree was desirable because it could make someone wise. So she takes from the fruit of that tree, and she ate from it. And she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate from it as well. And the eyes of the two of them were now opened. And now they become aware of the fact that they were naked. Until that point, just didn't, the same way little kids, they don't know they're naked. They didn't mean anything to them. Now, all of a sudden, as they become more aware and they start to develop pulls towards good, towards evil, now they become aware that they're naked. So they sew together fig leaves, and they make for themselves some kind of, he writes here girdles, but he makes some type of clothing to protect their privates. They make some type of garment out of these fig leaves. Some of the commentaries say, you notice how the Torah never identifies what the fruit was. The Torah never identifies it. There's always this misconception out there that it was an apple. I'm not aware of any Jewish sources who says that the fruit of the forbidden fruit was an apple. Some of the commentaries point to the fact that it was a fig, because they say that notice what leaves did they use to make this clothing for themselves. It said in Pasuk Zayin in verse 7, it says, Vayitberu alei ta'ina, that they sewed together fig leaves. So some of the commentaries say that none of the other trees would surrender their leaves because they said, you ate that fruit you weren't supposed to. Don't come to me for no leaves. But it was the fig tree, the one that they had eaten from. That was where they got the leaves from. That's what some say. You know what the Midrash Rabbah says? One of the Midrashim says that what the fruit was? Fruit was an esrog. Isn't that interesting? That the Midrash Rabbah says that the fruit that they ate was an esrog. And that's what was the Eitz Hadas. Interesting that should be the fruit that we use on Sukkot, right? Before we read from Parshas Bereishis every year. But be that as it may, that's the basic account that the Torah brings down of the eating of the Eitz Hadas. And the conversation, what we're going to focus on this morning is the conversation that went on between the Nachash, between the serpent and Chava, and how the serpent played mind games, you might say, with Chava to get her to eat from that Eitz Hadas. In order to open this up a little bit more, we're going to see Rashi. So I'm going to scroll down. Rashi's going on Pasuk Gimel. So we're going to see one on Pasuk Gimel and then one on Pasuk Daled. The one on Pasuk Gimel, let's just remind ourselves, is that the Nachash, the serpent, has said to Chava that, is it true? Everybody is saying, all the blogs are writing about this. What I'm hearing around the water cooler at work is that you're not allowed to eat any fruit in the garden. Is that true? And she responds in Pasuk Gimel, no, we're allowed to eat from everything we want. It's just one tree God says don't eat from. V'lo sigubo. And not only should we not eat from it, we also shouldn't touch it. So let's see what Rashi says there. Rashi says, v'lo tigubo, we shouldn't touch it. Hosifa al hatzivoy. Here, by Chava saying we're not allowed to touch it, she added to the command. God never said you're not allowed to touch it. God, if you look back at the previous psukim, all God said was you're not allowed to eat it. She on her own said this idea, you're not allowed to touch it. Lefichach bali de geron. Therefore, she shot herself in the foot. She ended up diminishing it. Hushanamar, this is what it says in Mishlei, al tosif al dvarav. Don't add to his words. Now, we have a general idea all the time. One of the first Mishnayos in Pirkei Avos tells us one of the responsibilities of Chazal is to make a sayag la Torah, to make a fence around the Torah, to make cautionary areas. In other words, Hashem, I always say, if you go to, let's say, Niagara Falls, the really dangerous place in Niagara Falls is all the way at the end. But the authorities don't want you to get to the end because then you'll be in danger. So they always put the fence a whole lot earlier. Same too, that's what Chazal oftentimes do when they make a Gezerah D'Rabbanan, is that they say, okay, on a Torah level, we can't do X, but we want to make sure no one ever gets to X to stumble, so we'll back it up and we'll say don't do Y in order to make X, to make certain that no one ever gets to that further locale. So there is this concept all the time. So what did Chava do wrong? Rashi's quoting again the Gemara, and it says what Chava did wrong was that she added to the tzivoy, she added to the command. God just said don't eat it, and she said no, we're not allowed to touch it. What's so bad about that? She was making a sayag l'Torah. She was making a fence, a protective fence. What was so bad? So I've seen some of the commentators explain there's nothing inherently wrong with a sayag as long as you clearly know what's forbidden on a Torah level and what's forbidden on a rabbinic level. What might be a minhag, what might be a decree, what might be a protective fence. But we're never supposed to confuse the two. Nebuch, there are so many people who confuse the two. Layla has so many stories from when she worked in New York, when we were living in New York when we were first married. She worked at Memorial Sloan Kettering Hospital, so that it's a cancer hospital, and she worked in the pediatrics department, and she encountered many Jews in that department who nebuch, their children were stricken with cancer, and they were in the process of fighting it. And she had so many stories that came back about how the confusion that some of these Jewish patients and their families had between what was a minhag and what was halacha. The lines had all been blurred. and that could lead to some real problems. I'll give you an example. So the physicians had cautioned parents, gave it as a word of wisdom. They said, listen, they were going to be starting chemotherapy on one of the children. They said it's going to be really shocking to the child to wake up every morning and clumps of hair to be in the pillow. So we suggest you do is proactively shave that child's head. Give them a very, very close haircut. It will be much less traumatic to the child not to wake up and having clumps of hair in the pillow or in the shower, in the bath, they have clumps falling out. And the parents said, we can't, we're not allowed to. He says, what are you talking about? Our boy's not yet 3 years old. We're not allowed to cut his hair. And it was a total confusion. There's no halacha out there that says you're not allowed to cut a boy's hair before 3. There's some groups that have a minhag that they wait till 3 years old to give the kid an upsharon. There's no halacha saying you're not allowed to cut the hair. Total confusion between what's a minhag and between what's halacha. And because of this, they were going to subject the kid to go through this trauma of having his hair fall out and to witness it and to be and all that, because they didn't understand what was the lines of demarcation. You can add things, that's fine, but be clear what's added and what's the real deal. And that's just one of many, many examples that she would come home and tell me. But there are entire communities, and again, that's what we have to be learned. The more learned we are, we understand what is baseline halacha, what is it that the Torah asks of us, what might be added on is some minhag, and we have to understand where there's room for give and take, and there's many, many equations that need to be made. So what Chava did here, what Rashi's telling us, quoting the Gemara in Sanhedrin, is she added to God's command. Now again, all the time, our sages make protective measures to make certain we don't come to violate any of the prohibitions in the Torah. And that's fine. However, we have to make it very clear what's rabbinic and what's a Torah ordinance. Here what Chava did was, she said that it's not true. She says, we're not only are we not allowed to eat from that fruit, we're also not allowed to touch it. And she added to God's command, saying that has the same authority. The same authority that says I cannot eat it, the same authority says I cannot touch it. And that's where the Nachash entraps her. That's where he snags her. Because look at the next Rashi. Next Rashi is going on Pasuk Daled. Pasuk Daled says, Vayomer Nachash al Isha, the serpent says to the woman, Lomos Temusin, it's not true. You won't die. Let's see what Rashi says. What's going on between the lines? Rashi quotes the Medrash, and Rashi says as follows, Lomos Temusun, you will not die. Dachva, he shoved her, he pushed her, ad shenagaba, till she touched the tree. Amar Allah, and then he says to her, Keshem Shen Misa Benegia, are you still alive or did you die? I'm still alive. Okay, and you touched the tree. So just like you didn't die from touching the tree, Kachen Misa Bachila, there's also no death from eating from the tree, from eating its fruit. So the serpent says, I got you. Now that you made that confusion, now that you blurred the lines, now that there's no distinction, and you say just as it's off limits to eat it, you also can't touch it, he says, now I got you. Because what did he do? He pushed her, she touched it, and look what happened. You didn't die. So the same way you didn't die from touching it, and you said that's just as severe as eating from it, so the same way you didn't die from touching it, you're also not going to die from eating it. And that's the conversation between the serpent and Chava that convinces her to take that chance, take that risk, and take a bite out of that fruit. That's how Rashi, quoting Chazal, tells us what happened there. Okay, I'm going to share with you something that I heard many times when I was in yeshiva from my Rosh Yeshiva there, from Rav Henach Leibowitz. He loved focusing on these two Rashis, and he had a very important point that he would share with us. And I'm going to share that with you now. So let's take a look on page 2. So page 2 is going to build off of these two Rashis. And this is from a number of years ago. Some of his Talmidim put together some of his sichos, some of his Musar Shmuzen. They put it together in Svarim, and they were called Chidushei Halev. So this is what Rav Henach Leibowitz would share with us from these two Rashis. So these two paragraphs, let me read them to you. V'nei davar temua ma'od. This is very, very strange. Ketzad hochicha Chava mizeh. How did the serpent prove to Chava from the fact that he pushed her and she touched it and she did not die? Shein misa benegia, shein misa be'achila. How did the serpent prove to Chava and get her to risk her life, saying to her, look, I pushed you, you touched it, and you didn't die. So just like you didn't die from touching it, you're not going to die from eating it. Chava herself knows Shakadosh Baruch Hu lo omar me'olam she'etz hadas mechel sama mavas. She knows that God never said that the Eitz Hadas, the tree, is a poisonous tree. It's not like poison ivy or poison sumac that you touch it and you die. It's not that you're going to be infected. It was she and maybe her husband, she and Adam come up with this a protective fence that not only are you not allowed to eat it, you're also not allowed to touch it. The way that they wanted to scare themselves off from getting too close to this tree was to say, just like there's misa, there will be death if someone eats from this tree. There's also going to be death from touching it. Even if it would be touching it, even if it was just accidental or unintentional. Therefore, when she saw after the Nachash pushed her that she didn't die from touching the tree, what she should have proven from this was that she made a mistake by coming up with this cheshbon and saying, you know what, the same way you're not allowed to eat from it, you're going to die, you're also not allowed to touch it. After she touched it, she should say, okay, my mistake. It's not true. There's no death penalty for touching the tree. The reason why God said you'll die if you eat from the tree, it's not because the tree has poison in it, and therefore you're also going to die if you touch it. And she shouldn't have started to conclude that God forbid, HaKadosh Baruch Hu shikar, that God lied to her, vein misa b'achila, and therefore there's no death with eating it. Ubetach shelo haysa tzricha lismoch al hachachazu lachnis es atzma lamatzav shel sakanas nefashos. Why on earth would she have risked her life here? So let's just pause for a second. So the way Rabbi Leibowitz would always ask this question is as follows. Again, let's review. What did Rashi tell us? Rashi tells us that Chava's mistake was she added to God's prohibition. God said, if you eat from your tree, the tree, you're going to die. And what did Chava do? She added to that. And she says, not just eating from it's going to bring death, but even touching it's going to bring death. So what did the Nachash do? The Nachash says, now I got you. Nachash says he pushes her. She touches the tree and she didn't die. So he says to her, you see, this whole thing is a mistake. Just like you didn't die from touching it, you're also not going to die if you eat it. And she does it. She eats it. So Rabbi Leibowitz would always ask, what is she thinking? What kind of logical argument is this that the snake's making? Chava knows that God didn't say if you touch it, you're going to die. It was she who added that. What she should have concluded after the snake pushed her and she didn't die after touching it is she should have said, I was wrong. Hashem was right all along, who said that there's only a death penalty carries a death penalty for eating it, not for touching it. I'm the one who added the death penalty for touching it. So if I touched it and survived, okay, I was wrong. But what does she do? The Nachash convinces her, if you survived, that means God was totally wrong. So there's no death penalty for eating it. What? That doesn't make any sense. Why doesn't she conclude, I'm wrong? Why is she going to say and conclude, God must be wrong? What is she crazy? What's going on here? So look at the next paragraph. Baram, however, Aleinu lavin, here's what we have to understand. Shekachu teva adam. This is the nature of us as human beings. This is the way we are hardwired. Shemifas gavaso, we are, by our basic nature, we're pretty haughty. That's just the way we are. The avas atzmo, and we love ourselves. We really believe in our intellect. Lo yoda al ta'oso, and therefore we are so reticent, we are so hesitant to ever admit that we made a mistake. Elayitla es hakala bezuaso. If it comes down to saying who was wrong, I'll point the finger at anyone else rather than at numero uno. It's just not the way I'm hardwired. If I have to say, if it's clear to me something's not adding up and someone made a mistake, the last person I'm going to point that finger at is me. I'll point that finger anywhere else first, but not at me. That's going to be absolutely last. He says, V'kacha yirakan. That's exactly what happened here. Shechava amda bedaita. Chava dug in her heels. And she said, Shakadosh Baruch Hu asru beglal sheyesh basam amaves. That the reason why you can't eat from the Eitz Hadas is because it's poison. U'lechein dana benavsha. Therefore, she expanded that and said, Shemikiman shein misa benagia. And therefore, she expanded it and said, therefore, you also can't touch it. And now, once the serpent proved to her that there's no misa, there's no death for touching it, Hare muchach, so then what's obviously happening? Shein sama mavas beitz, that means there's no poison in the tree. Azay, once there's no poison in the tree, gam achila ina mesukenes, it must not be dangerous to eat it. Ve'en lahamin chas v'shalom b'tzivoy Hashem yisparach, therefore there's no reason to believe in the warning of Hashem. Lamanu mizeh, what do we see from this? Ad kama kashu ladam la'akir batuso. How difficult it is for a human being to look in the mirror and say, I made a mistake. My natural instinct is to point the finger at anybody else and say, it was that person, that one made the mistake. Even to point the finger at God and say, God made the mistake. But I'm so hesitant to ever point the finger at myself and say, males, I messed up. That's just not the way we're hardwired. And this is the first mistake being made in Gan Eden. Chava fell for it, and the Nachash understood it. He manipulated that. He says, Lamanu mizeh, what do we learn from this? Ad kama kashu la'adam la'akir batuso. How difficult it is for a human being to ever recognize that he or she made a mistake. V'yosif adam l'chadesh kol minei svaros. A person will start to invent all sorts of theories, shal shtus, that are ridiculous, kedei lamis es davar, to defend my position. I'll come up with every crazy rationalization why the rest of the world is crazy. I'm the only one who's sane. That's what my gaiva, that's what my pride will lead me to do. And what do we see from this example? Shosifa lamin b'sfarasah, that Chava starts to add all sorts of theories to defend herself. Ad kadei kach, and how far did it go? Shechlita, she decided shakadosh baruch hu shiker, that God must have lied. And she was willing to bet her life on it because she could not say, I blew it, I messed up. Someone else must have messed up. It was someone else. Who am I going to pin it on? It must have been God. God must have made a mistake. This is a huge chiddush. I remember he would always talk about this, how careful we have to be and how we have to really question ourselves. When a mistake was made and we're looking to assign blame, our natural instinct is never to look at ourselves. But we really have to make an exerted effort to do so because it's not going to happen reflexively. We have to ask ourselves, before I start putting blame on everybody else, is it possible that I blew it? We have to ask ourselves. It's not a fun question to ask because all of us are proud. We believe in ourselves. We believe in our mindset. We believe in our intellect. But it's something that if we don't ask ourselves, we can make a catastrophic mistake. And this is an example here. And I remember he would always point this out to us. And this is such a powerful example because, again, just trying to make sense of these Rashis. How did Rashi learn this? Just to review this. Rashi says that the downfall of Chava and Adam was what? That they added and said, just like you're not allowed to eat it, you're also not allowed to touch it. Why? Because it's poison, and it's poison to the touch. So the snake says, now I got you. Snake pushes her, she touches it. Did you die? No. So just like there's no death for touching, it must be there's no death for eating. Oh, okay, I'll eat it. Are you crazy? Don't you know if there's a mistake here? Run through the equation again. Maybe the way to make this all make sense, why did I not die for touching this, is because God was right and I was wrong. But she didn't do that. She jumped to say, there was a mistake made here. It couldn't have been me. It must have been God. That's what Chava did. And that's how the Nachash says, I got you. So that's exactly, this is a huge point and how careful we need to be in analyzing the mistakes when they're made and making an exerted effort to ask ourselves a very uncomfortable question is, am I at fault? Was it possibly me before I point the finger at someone else? I want to share with you something that happened in my own life where I realized I fell right into this trap. And when I realized it, I just sat down and started cracking up because I could not believe what happened. And I realized how true this was. I'm going to share with you an incident that happened. I was still single at the time. So this was before 1999. I got married, Layla and I got married in December of 99. I'm going to guess this was in the summer of either 97 or 98, probably 98. Let me share with you something here. I'm going to scroll down. One of the best backpacking, I still love going camping, the great outdoors, but when I was single, I used to do a lot of backpacking. So that means you go out for a hike with a couple days worth of gear with you and supplies. Beautiful trails exist all over the country. The most famous one's the Appalachian Trail. I told you about that once. I spent 3 days on the Appalachian Trail, but probably the most beautiful backpacking trip I ever went on was in Pennsylvania. I first did it with a friend of mine, Joel Pomerantz, lives in Israel now. So I did it. It was called the West Rim Trail. Let me read to you a little bit about this trail, and then I'll tell you what happened. So the West Rim Trail is the definitive Pennsylvania trail for backpackers. It's 30.5 miles long, multiple canyon vistas. It runs along a place they call it the Grand Canyon of Pennsylvania, north central Pennsylvania. Absolutely beautiful part of the state. Beautiful. And it's free. Primitive camping are only some of the highlights. You got to bring a tent with you, but along the trail, there's plenty of places to camp. The scenery is just crazy. The trail has been featured in Outside Magazine as the best hike in Pennsylvania. The campsites are abundant, and there are streams along the trail for use as water sources. You obviously need a filter. I had a handheld pump filter, to make it safe to drink, because there's all sorts of bacteria that could possibly be in the water. The trail has a long climb at either terminus, but the majority of the trail has moderate elevations changes. The trail can be hiked in either direction, north to south or south to north. I hiked it south to north. You'll soon see why, with similar elevation changes. Pine Creek Outfitters, so that's a company that's set up right nearby, offers shuttle service for the Western Trail. We are only 1 mile northwest of the trailhead in Ansonia. It sounds like it's Ansonia, Pennsylvania. You can get a shuttle to the south end and start hiking north. So that's what you do. You park your car at Pine Creek Outfitters. Really nice guy. I remember it was a father and son team, and they give you a ride in their vehicle down to the 30 plus miles south. And then you hike back up to Pine Creek Outfitters, where you'll pick up your car at the end of the hike. They advertise they've got a porcupine-free parking lot. So I remember asking them, what do you mean a porcupine-free parking lot? And they said it's a real problem because porcupines love salt. And what they'll do is if you leave your car there, they'll lick up and they'll chew up all your pipes and the wires underneath your car, because there's always salt deposits from the winter up in the north, because there's going to be salt on the roads for the winter and to get rid of snow and the ice. So they'll chew up your car. You won't be able to start it. So what is a porcupine-free lot? They've got a couple dogs in the parking lot, and these dogs scare away the porcupines. Okay, so that's what he says there. You can also get your car delivered. I didn't do that. We just, and look at this, it's Rattlesnake Rock. You hear a name like that, I'm not going to Rattlesnake Rock. Okay, and head north to south. So there are also drop-off points along. Okay, so that's what we did. We parked at Pine Creek Outfitters. They drove us to the south, and then we hiked north. So beautiful, absolutely beautiful hike. So it's about 30.5 miles long. If you're doing it at a leisurely rate of about 10 miles a day, it's about a 3-day hike. Here's just a picture. This is an average picture. I just saw this on their website. It's beautiful. It's called the West Rim Trail because you're on the west rim. This is called the Pine Creek Gorge. There was an old railway that ran along the river in the bottom of that gorge. The railway is no longer there. Now it's a biking path that goes for miles, also beautiful. But this hiking path runs along the upper west rim. The vistas are just astonishing. It was just beautiful, beautiful hike. So I went with my friend Joel one summer. About halfway through, I don't know how this happened. He came down with a crazy case of pink eye in middle of the hike. So we had to bail out. So we had a map with us. We looked, we found the nearest road, Forest Road in there. We got off the trail, hiked down to the road, waited there for a pickup truck to come along. Real friendly locals out there. They gave us a ride back in the back of their pickup truck to our car, and we had to bail out and drive back to Cleveland. But it bothered me for that whole year. It bothered me that I never finished that trail, and I wanted to go back and do it. So by the next summer, it was probably 98. By the next summer, I was trying to find a friend who was available that summer. It could have been a couple years earlier with Joel because he got married before I did. But by the summer of 98, I really wanted to go back and conquer this trail, but I couldn't find any friends who were available to do it. So I said, I'll do it on my own. So I did it on my own. Again, backpacking, no one says it's safe to do this stuff on your own, but I wasn't by myself. There were other hikers who were out there, and also I had a lot of experience. I felt I was up to the task, but there were other hikers out there, so I didn't feel it wasn't something that was a problem. And again, it was an awesome hike. But let me tell you what happened. At one point in the hike, towards the end, I made a bad turn. So they had it marked with blazes. Someone went along the trail and painted with blazes on trees, so you constantly know you're along the right path. At some point, there was another path. That must have been animals, maybe deer or something, made a path through the woods. And I just lost track of where I was. I got off on the deer path and off of the main hiking path. And there were so many indications that I had made a mistake. I remember looking at the map, and it wasn't making sense where I was because the map, I was crossing streams, but those weren't on the map. And I kept going. And I remember saying to myself as I'm hiking, this is irresponsible. Whoever put this map together was the State Forest Service. I think I was using one of their maps. I'm going to give them a piece of my mind. When I'm done with this, they blew it, that they messed up like this. It's a faulty map and the stuff's not marked well. I was, in my mind, I was making a whole litany of a list of all the people that I was going to give it to for causing me to go off trail. And or not, I wasn't off trail. I was on the right trail, but the map was wrong, and that the streams weren't on the map. Everything was wrong, and this is going on. I remember for several miles. And now remember, when you're out there for 3 days, you're hauling along a lot of gear with you. You got a big pack. It's probably close to 50 pounds between all the gear. You got your tent, your sleeping bag, your bedroll. You got food. You got the water you're carrying. You got whatever other equipment you got. And I'm just going, and I remember in my mind, I'm making every list. Who are the people I'm going to blame? Who am I going to give it to for messing me up like this? And finally, I remember sitting down. I was taking a water break, and I'm again studying that map, saying, this map is totally wrong. I was ready to tear up the map. It was so wrong. This makes no sense. And then I'm noticing the mud around me, and it all the indications was I was no longer on the right path. The path was so well maintained. I'm not on the right path. It was just it was a tiny little trail. There was animal markings on the path. And then I saw something, I don't know if it was from a black bear or not, but it was a big paw mark in that. And I said at that point, Males, it's time to stop the game. You made a wrong turn. Go back. And I just started laughing at myself because I realized what I had done. It was me. I made the mistake. I was pointing the finger of blame at everyone else, at the forest rangers, at the state, everyone. And it was me. I made a mistake. I made a goof. I got off path. I got detoured by a deer path, and I got off path. And so I had to walk back another couple miles. It's probably cost me about 7 miles because I think I did the calculation at the time. I went over 3 miles in the wrong direction, and then I had to come 3 miles back. And it was so clear when I made it back to where I was supposed to be that the mistake was all mine. The path was perfect all along. The trail was perfect. Everything was marked the way it was supposed to be marked. I wasn't looking at some point. I got distracted, and I got off path, and I went down some deer path. That's what led me out of direction. But once I was back on the regular path, and it was so clear to me what had happened, I remember sitting down, taking a water break. I was all by myself at that point, and I just burst out laughing. I was laughing at myself. I was saying, you are such a fool. Look at yourself. You were blaming everybody else. You were blaming everybody, the forest rangers, the state, the state, whoever it was who made that, because it was a topographical map to get all the elevation, everything. I was blaming everybody. The one person I didn't blame was myself. I wasn't willing to concede and say, maybe Males, you're not that massive map reader and outdoorsman, woodsman, Daniel Boone that you think you are, and you stepped off onto the wrong path. I wasn't willing to do that, but I was going to read the Rangers, the riot act when I got back. That was what I was going to do. What? Yeah, I'll tell you one other incident where this happened too. Layla just reminded me of. But I remember afterwards I was laughing at myself, and I thought back to this Chazal. I thought back to this Rashi, and I said, this is exactly what the Rosh Yeshiva would always talk about. This was the mistake of Chava. This is exactly what he did. And I remember I made a note in my sefer. I have it here. And in the note, this is exactly what happened to me on the West Rim Trail in Pennsylvania. This is exactly what happened to me there. Layla just reminded me that there was a point early on in our marriage where I did the same thing. And I told her, I said, oh my God, this is exactly what Rashi was talking about as well. We were living in New York at the time when we were first married. And one of our cousins lives in Teaneck, New Jersey. Our cousin Chana and Stan, they live in Teaneck, New Jersey. And one of their boys had a bar mitzvah. So we went for Shabbos to Teaneck, New Jersey. And my parents came too. We were staying in different homes. My parents were in one home, and Layla and I were staying at a neighbor, and we were there for a bar mitzvah. Remember back in the day when we used to travel and go to simchas, and we could easily be hosted at people's homes in that world that once existed. God willing, we'll get back there soon. So the clock had just changed. It was about now. It was a little bit later in the fall, and the clock had just changed. But the clock had changed, but I hadn't changed my Shabbos watch. So they told us in the morning, you're going to get up in the morning. Let's say davening in the shul was at 9. And, they put out some coffee, some refreshment. And then the family told us they had a son who was practicing for his bar mitzvah. The father said, I just practice with him in the morning, and then we'll go to shul together. So no problem. So it was fall, right? So the clock had just fallen behind, but my Shabbos watch hadn't fallen behind. I hadn't changed it yet. So we get up in the morning. I get up and I look at my watch, and it says it's like 8:30. So I get so nervous. I wake up late. I say, get up. It's already 8:30. Davening's at 9. Get up. So she's, oh, we're in a panic. She says, oh my gosh. So I said, quick, make yourself a coffee. You want to? So I get her out of bed. She gets dressed in a jiffy. She gets a coffee. We run out into the kitchen, and we're like panicking. It's already like 8:45. And there's the father and son. They're sitting so calmly, having a piece of Danish and practicing bar mitzvah lesson. And I'm saying, so what's wrong with them? It shows in like 15 minutes, and they're not in a rush to go anywhere. I'm getting nervous. There's a cousin's bar mitzvah. We got to get going. And then we look at the walls, and we see the clocks on the walls say like 7:30 instead of 8:30, 7:40. And my commenter, I said, what's wrong with these people? Why are their clocks all wrong? Don't they know what the time is? And I look at my watch. It didn't even dawn on me that I'm the one who's wrong and everyone else is right. I said, look at that. Their microwave says 7:30. Their oven says 7:30. The clock on the wall says 7:30. It's 8:30. We got to go. We got a bar mitzvah to get to. I'm like panicking. What are we going to do? And then finally I said something to them. I said, should we start off ahead? And they're looking at me like, davening's not till 9 o'clock. It's only like 7:45 now. I look at my watch, and I just burst out laughing. I said, I did it again. I cannot believe it. That's what I did. I found myself in this situation where it's clear that someone had made a mistake, but the last person that I was willing to concede had made that mistake was me. Cannot possibly be me. I've got it together. Everybody else is wrong. And I remember to this day, Layla says, I can't believe you got me up an hour early. That Shabbos, I worked so hard all week long. I'm finally in a good sleep. You got me up an hour early because you couldn't admit that everyone else was right. She just reminded me of this again. I had forgotten about that. All right. But again, it's the same story. And that's the mistake that Chava made. And that's what the Nachash capitalized on. That's how he manipulated her. So this is such an important lesson for all of us to remember, because I can't believe Chava's the only one, and I can't believe I'm the only one. This is the way as human beings, this is the way we're hardwired. It's hard to admit. It's hard to say, if a mistake was made, maybe it was me. My pride prevents me from doing that. And it's much easier to point the finger of blame at everybody else, even God, rather than myself. So we have to make a concerted effort to ask ourselves that very difficult question, uncomfortable question. Is it possible I might not have had this together as much as I thought I do, and maybe I'm the one who made the mistake? It's something, if we don't make a concerted effort to do so, we can make a tragic mistake. We could walk 7 miles extra with a 50-pound pack. We can get up an hour early on a Shabbos morning and drive your spouse nuts. Or you could do what Chava did, and you could end up eating from the Eitz Hadas. So it's something that we want to make sure to do, that we're asking ourselves the uncomfortable question and be ready to recognize that I might be the one who has made a mistake. Okay, I want to share with you a second idea. And if you ever find yourself in Pennsylvania, you don't have to hike this entire hike. This hike runs through state parks. So you can go to state parks and have these scenic overlooks where you can see much of the scenery. Absolutely beautiful. I highly, highly recommend it. By the way, I did make it back fine that summer, and I made it back to my car. There was a gas station right before you get to Pine Creek Outfitters, and that's what you did to treat yourself for completing the 30.5-mile hike, was to get yourself some ice cream bars and enjoy that. And I remember that it was a great feeling, and it's if you ever have a chance to do that, really, really, it was a wonderful, wonderful hike. All right, I want to share with you one more Torah idea from this week's Parsha. This is very powerful. So it's in the next parak, the next chapter in Bereishis, when Cain kills his brother Hevel. So Cain and Abel. So let's see these 3 psukim here, Ches, Tes, and Yod. So Ches. So this is, remember the story, Cain and Hevel are the 2 children of Adam and Chava, the 2 sons of Adam and Chava, and each one of them picks up a different line of work. Hevel becomes a planter, someone who's farming, and Cain becomes a planter, and Hevel becomes a shepherd. So each one of them decides they want to bring something of their handiwork to God. So Cain, who's the planter, the farmer, he brings some flax, we're told. It doesn't say what is. Rashi brings down Chazal that what he brought was flax. and Hevel brings a sheep. So that's what he brings down there. So God accepts the carbon of Hevel, does not accept the carbon of Cain. Cain gets enraged, gets jealous of his brother Hevel, and kills him. So let's see what happens. Ches, Vayomer Cain al Hevel achiv. So Cain begins a conversation with his brother Hevel. And it spins out of control. He gets into a fight with him, and he gets all mad at him, and he decides to kill. So Cain kills Hevel. Cain kills Abel. Tes, Vayomer Hashem al Cain. So God speaks to Cain, a very famous line. Hevel achicha, where is your brother Hevel? And he responds back famously, Lo yadati, I don't know. Hashomer achi ani, what am I, my brother's keeper? I don't know where he hangs out. I don't know where Hevel is. So 10, Yod, God says back, Vayomer, so Hashem says, Me'asi, so what have you done? Kol demei achicha tzoakim alai min adama. Your brother's blood is crying out to me from the earth. Rashi here picks up on the word demei achicha. Demei achicha, it doesn't say dam achicha, which would mean your brother's blood. Demei achicha is like plural, your brother's bloods. So why is it written in the plural? So he quotes the Gemara in Sanhedrin. Let's see. Demei achicha, Rashi says, damo v'dam zariosav. You know why it's plural? The bloods of your brother call out to me? Because it's not just Hevel's blood who's screaming for justice. It's all of Hevel's potential. Because you knocked off Hevel in his stage in life where he had so much potential. He could have fathered more future generations. And then, so who is screaming out for justice? Not just Hevel, but all of that murdered potential. His children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, at Sof Koladoros, till the end of time. That's what Cain is going to be held accountable for. That's the first pshat Rashi says, Demei achicha, the bloods of your brother. All of that potential. Damo v'dam zariosav. I remember having this feeling once. Layla and I were visiting Israel. It's probably going back about 6 or 7 years ago. We were there in the summer, and we had a chance on that trip. During that trip, we were up in Tzfat. And while we were up in Tzfat, right next door to the famous cemetery in Tzfat, where there's some real famous tzaddikim buried, there's also an Israeli military cemetery in Tzfat. And this was soon after one of the wars in Gaza. And I don't know why. We were just drawn into this military cemetery. And it was an incredible incident that happened there. We found ourselves at a grave of someone who had just been killed a few months earlier during one of the fighting in Gaza, encountered one of his comrades. A different story. But one of the things that we felt there in that cemetery that I'd never really experienced before was it was such a powerful feeling of murdered potential, because almost everyone who was buried in that cemetery were between the ages of 18 and 25. It was like you're looking at all the tombstones and you're seeing, okay, this one was killed in the War of 48, and then this one in the 50s, and then this one in the Six-Day War, and here's someone who fell in the Yom Kippur War, and then in Lebanon, and then to the most recent one in Gaza. And we were just couldn't help think. You're looking at these graves of people, most of them were no more than 25 years old, and you're just thinking of all the potential, the lost potential. And I remember thinking of this Rashi, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to hold the murderers accountable. Not just the blood that's crying out is not just those people who are at rest there, but all their potential. Damo v'dam zariosav, their blood and the blood of all of their future descendants. All that potential is what the murderers are going to be held accountable for as well. That's the first pshat that Rashi says. That's why it's written in plural, Demei achicha. Rashi says the second pshat, Demei achicha, why? He goes, Davar acher, another reason, another way to understand why it's in plural, is Sha'asabo pitzaim harbe, is that this is the first murder that ever occurred in history. So when Cain killed Hevel, he didn't know how to kill someone. It's never happened before. So he made many, many different cuts, many different wounds in him. He doesn't know from where, how do you kill someone? How do you inflict enough damage that enough blood is going to rush out of them, that their soul is going to depart them? So it was a very bloody crime scene, is the second shot there, that he stabbed them all over the place, and there was blood rushing out over it. So there must have been multiple puddles of blood. So that's why he's saying, Demei achicha, the bloods of your brothers, because it wasn't just in one location. Blood was absolutely everywhere. It was a gruesome crime scene. That's the second shot in Rashi. The first pshat in Rashi, though, is what I want to harp on now. The first pshat in Rashi is that Demei achicha, the plural is that all the potential, God is going to hold him accountable for all the potential. And I want to just share with you something, a very nice thought. This is from Rav Shimon Schwab. So here's just a brief bio on Rav Shimon Schwab. He passed away in 1995. Again, he was born and educated in Germany. He did his later years of yeshiva were in Lithuania. He started as a Rav first in Ichenhausen, a small German town in Bavaria. When he comes to America, he's a Rav in Baltimore for many years. And then ultimately in Kaladas Yeshurin, that's known as Breuer's Shul in Washington Heights, where he spent several decades till his passing. He was also a great author. He wrote very nicely. And here's one of his, they have a book of collected writings. One of them is called Selected Essays. So one of the yeshivas he studied in his later years, while he was a young man, but in his final years in yeshiva, he spent, I believe, about a year and a half in the Mir Yeshiva in Poland, and also at about a year and a half in the Telz Yeshiva in Lithuania. So he has an essay called "The Impact of Telz," where it was started off as a speech, where he must have been delivering this at a dinner for the Telz Yeshiva after it had been reestablished in Cleveland. So here, just a couple paragraphs from that essay, which I think was originally a speech. He says, "When we speak of the loss of 6 million Jews during the Holocaust, we should try to figure out what would have happened had these Jews been allowed to live. If each one would have been blessed with just 3 children, then 25 years ago, these 6 million would have turned into 18 million. If we think of each of these with an additional 3 descendants, meaning they each had 6 children, we could probably say that in a way 54 million Jews have actually perished in the Holocaust. Remember, when Cain killed his brother Hevel, Hashem said to him, Kol demei achicha." I'm sorry, he didn't mean if each one had 6 children. He meant, again, if each victim of the Holocaust each victim of the Holocaust had 3 children, and then each of those children had 3 children, he says this would multiply to become 54 million. Now he goes, remember, when Cain killed his brother Hevel, Hevel said to him, Kol demei achicha tzakim alai min adama. The voice of the bloods of your brother, Lashon Rabim, meaning plural, cries out to me. Rashi explains in that first pshat, Damo v'dam zariosav, implying that Cain killed more than one person. The blood of Hevel, his brother, was also the blood of Hevel's descendants. These losses were all blamed on Cain, the murderer of one man. In that sense, during the time of the last Churban, not only a few hundred Jews of Telz were brutally sacrificed, because the city of Telz, not just the yeshiva, the city of Telz in Lithuania, was gunned down by the Nazis. This was before they started shipping people to death camps. They had the mobile killing squads worked over much of Lithuania, and the whole city was just gunned down in the woods outside of the town. So he says it was not just a few hundred Jews of Telz that were brutally sacrificed. From our vantage point today, we could count the untold thousands of these victims' potential children and children's children and their Talmidim and Talmidei Talmideihem. They all died al Kiddush Hashem. Hashem yinakim damam. On the other hand, let us now accentuate the positive. Through the last 50 years, like other yeshivas that experienced similar tchias amesim, rejuvenation, Telz was zocha to produce hundreds, perhaps thousands of Talmidei Chachamim. And when we think in terms of the future, that means hundreds of thousands and even truly millions of Chachmei Torah, which have been resurrected, b'chasdei Hashem. So what Rav Schwab is pointing out is that, again, when we take this idea of Rashi, that Cain didn't just kill Hevel, he killed all of Hevel's potential. So then when we think about what the Nazis did in the Holocaust, it becomes far more tragic than just 6 million. What on earth would have been if those 6 million weren't killed? All of their potential, their descendants, and then those who were teachers, all their students, and all who knows what impact all those victims would have had on the world. It's so much greater than just those 6 million. And he says, if you accentuate the positive too, that also means that when we do something and we benefit another person, we're not just helping one person. If we can truly uplift another person, we're helping them, their offspring, all the people they'll have a positive impact on. And that really should give us pause to think, if every time I'm thinking, do I really want to do this chesed? Am I too tired? Am I not? That should say no, because I'm not just doing a chesed for one person. I'm doing a chesed for that person and then all that person's potential. So it really has a way to magnify it. So let's not just focus on the negative, let's focus on the positive too. I'll just conclude with this. Several years ago, Layla and I, when we were in Israel the last time, we spent a Shabbos with my brother Josh on his yeshuv in Memphis. And they asked me to prepare a Divrei Torah to give there. They don't give the drasha on Shabbos day. They do it Friday night. between Kabbalah, Shabbos, and Marim. So they asked me to give the drasha. So it was a work. I had to deliver it in Hebrew, but I worked on it before. I prepared a drasha in Hebrew, and I spoke something along these lines. But here at the end, I said this idea that Rav Schwab was sharing here, it gives new thought, what I have in bold here. We're all familiar with this saying. It's from a Mishnah in Sanhedrin. Anyone who kills another member of the Jewish people, it's as if they killed an entire world. Why? Because we don't just look at that one person. We look at what that person's potential was, whether it's in their own offspring or all the people that it would have had a potential positive impact on. There's no way to ascertain that. So by killing one person, snuffing that person out, you have no idea what was just impacted. And that's why it's so devastating. But look at the positive, the other side of the coin. Anybody who sustains one Jewish life, if they did it, it's as if they saved an entire world. Why? Because it's not just that one person, it's that person's potential, their offspring, but not just their offspring, all the people that they would have a positive impact on, all of the people who they would have done something good for, that's also impacted. So in a sense, we really need to think about this before we, God forbid, none of us should ever do something hurtful to another person. But we're not just hurting one person. The negative impacts will just spiral out of control. Because if I hurt that person and that has negative consequences on that person's family life and on whoever that person impacts, it can be terrible. But let's look at the positive. Is that if we view the potential, let's not just view the potential of our bad acts, let's view the potential of our positive acts. When we do something, when we uplift another, when we are mechazik, when we support another person, what that gives us the ability to do is to say that we have a hand in all of the potential good that comes out of that person. The people that that person impacts will be connected to all that. So that should really give us pause, and that should motivate us to try and do good for other people, even if it's not always so easy to do. So let's stop here.